Warning. This podcast contains true stories that are not intended for those missing a sense of humor. Any resemblance to actual events or allegations are purely coincidental. Before listening, please relieve yourself, as possible adverse effects include spontaneous bladder leakage, mild hysteria, and sudden release of dopamine. Names have been changed to protect the innocent and guilty. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, Karen. Welcome to Coding Consultant Confessions with Tony Elholmes, Stacy Buck, and Victoria Mole. Unfiltered, unedited, unapologetic. In this podcast, Tony, Stacy, and Victoria come together to share unique perspectives, engaging dialogue, entertaining commentary, and funny stories for those working in the healthcare industry. And now, here are your hosts, Tony, Stacy, and Victoria.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning into a brand new episode of Coding Consultant Confessions. I'm your host, Tony Elholmes, and I'm joined by my amazing friends and co-hosts, Stacy Buck and Victoria Mole. I want to say thank you to all of our listeners and supporters for tuning in every other Wednesday. We've really appreciated the comments, the likes, the sharing, and just all of the love and support for our podcast. So today's episode, we're going to get into the great debate. We're going to talk about the two certifying bodies that really dominate the industry, AAPC and AHIMA. We're going to talk about what does it all mean? I think it can be very overwhelming, especially when you're first getting into the industry, kind of navigating the waters, knowing who the players are, all these acronyms and credentials. We're going to get into what does that all mean? Which one is right for you and how to best navigate that decision. Is it one? Is it the other? Is it both? So we're going to get into some of those burning questions. So let's dive right in. Stacy, let's start with you. Let's talk about your thoughts and experiences with AAPC.
So with AAPC, I'm trying to think how long I've been a member with them. I've been a member for, I think, 7 years now. So it's a little bit newer for me to be a member of AAPC in my career. I'm like long-term, I feel like a lifer for like AHIMA because I got my RRA back in, 1998, when I came out of college. So that's why I was a member there. So I've been with AAPC now for, 2015. And I only have one credential with AAPC, and that is the CIRCC. So because of that, I feel like my experience with AAPC is very limited as far as like personal opinions on the value of a membership, just because I'm in like such a small like niche that AAPC doesn't do anything in that niche because there's someone who has almost a complete monopoly in that niche who shall remain nameless. Everybody knows who that person is. So, and I only joined AAPC because you have to join AAPC to sit for the CIRCC exam. Otherwise, I probably would not have joined, because as far as the membership benefits are concerned for me personally, I don't really see that there's a lot of value there, just because I do radiology coding and there are other organizations, like for diagnostic radiology, you have RCCB that I'm credentialed through and they do stuff over there. So, generally speaking with AAPC, I can tell you some things I'm not a fan of. Can we go there and talk about the things I'm like not a fan of? So one thing, and I look at it from a little bit different perspective because I'm like a vendor, so I'll kind of start there. I won't get into that too much, but being a CE vendor, the structure that they have for CEUs and having to pay all the money for CE approval is not something I'm particularly thrilled with. I really don't like the fact that I can't offer CIRCC CEs because that's an exclusive agreement where only 3 vendors can, actually offer those. And I know that a lot of members don't like that restriction. They have vented to me that they don't like the restriction, but I'm like, members have gone to AAPC about it. I've asked them about it. And as far as I can tell, there's no, way that they're going to change that anytime soon. Now, looking at it from just the membership perspective, not talking about the vendor, that's a whole nother area I don't really want to get into. But I would see more value in being an AAPC member if I could be more involved. And what I mean by that is I have a lot of experience serving in leadership positions with AHIMA when it was at the local level with the local HIM association. It was also at the state level, with Florida and so on. When you look at the structure for AAPC and the local chapters and the qualifications to be an officer, I think there's only like one position that you can hold if you don't have like a core credential, which is very limiting. So there's two. So Victoria, you can probably elaborate on what that is. If you don't want to go ahead and just jump in and say while we're on topic, you have to be a CPC or what else?
Yeah, I think you have to have an AAPC credential for president, vice president, and I want to say education officer or member development. I can never remember the third. So there's technically two positions you can do without having a certification.
Yeah. So having only the CIRCC, I'm so limited in what I can do. And I years ago, I wanted to get involved with AAPC, and I'm like, well, this is kind of restrictive to me. I've been there and done that with AHIMA. I have the proven track record. I've served at all these different levels, and I'm kind of excluded over here with AAPC, where I would be happy to get involved. But if I can't, be in those positions and, be president and do those other things, then I'm like, I don't see the point in me getting involved at all, because I'm all about progression. I'll jump in and I'll start where I need to. But I feel that that's very limiting. And I don't know if other people are in that situation. I don't know how many people out there have a specialty credential only and then don't have those core credentials. But I just feel like from the member perspective, I wish that was something that they were not so stuck on, and they would open that up a little bit more. And I know that some chapters have a hard time getting volunteers. And I know our local chapter kind of comes and goes and fades and in and out. So I think that they could open up a bigger pool, of candidates. So anyway, I don't have a lot to say about AAPC, again, only because my experience is so limited. You ladies have a lot more. When we get to AHIMA, I got a lot to say over there. So I'll save my time for when we get to them.
What about you, V? What are your thoughts and experiences with AAPC? Just on the board of directors, that's all.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I'm on the board of directors for the chapter association for the AAPC. So I help out with coordinating some of the activities that go on with local chapters. The AAPC has two kind of boards. They have the chapter association board that helps with chapter association stuff, local chapters. And then they have the board of directors, which I'm not always 100% sure what the board of directors does. I know they take a lot of input from membership, and then they meet with people on the AAPC to kind of like advise almost like on behalf of the members on, if they're bringing on new products, if they're thinking about doing different services, So I've been involved with the AAPC, and I am just certified through the AAPC since 2008, I believe. I've had pretty good experiences with the AAPC. Like any organization, there's things that you wish you could change. Sometimes when you look at them from a surface level, it looks like an easy change, and then you find out, it's probably more involved than you would think. I started volunteering with the AAPC as an officer fairly early on. I think I might have still been in my apprenticeship status when I was, and I've worked with two different chapters, Allentown and Reading, Pennsylvania. And the thing I liked about getting involved with the local chapters and with the AAPC more is that there were a lot of things that I would go to my employer and want to do to progress my career. And it was like, no, because you sometimes get stuck. Sometimes, you don't have supportive management, and they're like, yeah, you can't do this. You can't do that. Who do you think you are? But the AAPC has always been very good. Like if you want to take on a leadership role as an officer, they'll let you. Like you can at least be a secretary or help out with your local chapter. If you want to present to the local chapter, they're happy to take on presenters. If you want to write an article, like you can write an article and submit it to Healthcare Business Monthly, and they will absolutely polish it and publish it for you. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that I've had there that have really helped build my career that I was not being offered for my employer. And that was really what helped elevate me to next levels. The reason I was able to go from a coder into a senior coder role was because I had on my resume that I had my auditing credential, which I got through the AAPC. Was because I was able to demonstrate that I had leadership roles because I volunteered at the local chapter. I was able to demonstrate that I had presentation skills because of what I did with the AAPC. I was able to demonstrate that I had writing skills because of what I did with the AAPC. So it was really that elevated me to the next level on my next career move versus what I was already doing with my employer, because they just weren't supportive. They were the type of people that are there like, what are you doing? What are you up to? There was talk at the time, other coders would come to me and be like, they don't like that you make them look bad. So I really feel, that the AAPC was more so the driver behind my career kind of developing into what it was, which was why when opportunities opened up to work on, the board of directors, I was willing to give back because I had already I felt like I had taken so much already from the organization. And I think the more that you get involved with the AAPC, the more you can have those opportunities. When ICD-10 transition happened, they kind of hand selected people that they're like, hey, we want you to go out and do presentations for us, to do training on ICD-10. They pay pretty well for webinars. They pay, I think, $1,000 for a webinar. I think that's what I saw last on their website. So there are paid presenting opportunities that you can get through them. If you start getting more involved, sometimes you do get emails reaching out from people in the AAPC that they're like, we have a project, we have someone that we need as an SME, we have opportunities that we can provide to you. And where I think AAPC is struggling right now is we've had, and maybe AHIMA is struggling with this as well, we've had such great structure with our local chapters. We've had, I don't want to say cliques, but these groups of people who are very dedicated to it. We want to get back to our membership. We want to do this. They have set things that they do. They either have, a clothing drive every year, or we have, a seminar. We have meetings. We bring in all these great people. And that was just so wonderful. And then the pandemic hit and we moved on to this virtual setting. And we're still trying to hold on to that feeling of how do we support our local area, but also not completely exclude everyone who's not in the local area. So it's a struggle right now with, for example, so say my chapter's having Stacy come in and talk about interventional radiology. Awesome. We can have her present virtually. She can stay there in Florida and do whatever she needs to in her space and present virtually for us. But then let's say we have a Zoom meeting where we can only hold 100 people, and we have people that want to come in from Alabama and Arkansas and California and India. How do we balance? We want to keep our local chapter feeling like a local chapter and not like it's just a webinar. How do we keep that kind of networking feel into it? So I think that's one of the things that we're struggling with. Plus, with everything that's transpired with the pandemic, volunteerism is not what it used to be. A lot more people are looking for that work-life balance. They don't want to have to take on extra. So to find people that are willing to dedicate time to things like finding speakers, finding exam areas, that's, I think, a big sore spot right now with the local chapters is, unlike AHIMA, AAPC is using volunteers. We have to have volunteers finding a space to host those certification exams, and they have to volunteer their time. Now, there are certain perks you can give to people that are volunteering their time. You could comp their lunch or their breakfast or give them a gift card or something. But it's still a lot to ask, especially when people are now drawing back more. They're like, no, I don't want to have to get in my car and drive anywhere. I don't want to have to dedicate my time. I'd rather stay at home and chill and watch Netflix. So I think that's definitely an area. But yeah, the AAPC is so interesting. I just throwing this out there about the AAPC. One of the things that they've been bringing up the last couple of conferences, if you're not aware, is that they are starting certifications in other countries. So now they have like a certified professional coder Australia. I don't know, I can't remember what exactly it is. It's like a CPC AM or something. So now they're designating different coding credentials for different regions of the world, which is cool. And I'm really interested to see kind of how that's going to progress, and if AAPC will continue to kind of corner that market, or if we're going to see different contenders enter the ring.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point as far as how the professional organizations are expanding internationally. I mean, AHIMA is certainly doing stuff like that as well. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that all plays out and how the organizations shift and how that impacts various job markets. I mean, I know there's always been the contention with American coders that the more we do internationally, the more it takes away from, jobs that are offered in the US. But I always tell people that think like that, they're really short-sighted in their thought process, because really the opportunity lies with us to be able to help these countries that do not have these sophisticated infrastructures in place, to help build them, to help empower them with the opportunities to build that infrastructure. So it's cool to see that, and I think it's going to be really interesting. As far as my experience with AAPC, so I've been an AAPC member since 2011. I have 3 credentials with the AAPC, obviously the CPC core credential, the CPMA, which is the medical auditor, and then the certified risk adjustment coder, the CRC. So those 3 credentials have obviously afforded me a tremendous amount of success. I was also the president of the Orlando, Florida AAPC chapter for 2 years. I served, and that was an incredible experience. I can definitely relate to what Victoria says about the shifts in the dynamics and how people are just not as willing to volunteer. Especially with the pandemic, the community, the sense of community that we got before is completely different. It's night and day. I'm not saying it's bad or it's worse or it's better. It's just different. I remember when we used to all, we would rent out this space and we would all, get together for the evening meetings after everybody had worked. And it was a lot of fun, and you don't realize how much you miss it until you don't have that anymore. And now, I'm not involved in the leadership of the chapter as much. I really help as more of a mentor for the leadership team, the board that's serving. I think it's really interesting to see how the sense of community has dwindled. It's not that it's, again, better or worse. It's just so different. And that community and that vibe that you got when you walked into a chapter meeting in person is just totally different than when you're logging in, in your pajamas from your house. The members are not as engaged. For the content, I remember when we would have in-person meetings, I mean, there'd be all this dialogue and this back and forth and questions and just amazing conversations. And obviously that's not happening with virtual, because people are not able to just jump in and, raise their hand and that sort of thing. When you got 200 or 300, I think we get like 200 or 300 people that join our monthly Zoom meetings, that obviously changes the dynamic pretty substantially. As far as AAPC, so, they're a for-profit company. Having been a member for over 10 plus years now, I've definitely seen shifts in the membership, the quality of the membership, the people that are coming into the organization. I do think that, and this is, going to probably cause me to get a lot of flack, I do think that the tests are easier than they were in previous years. If you look at the pass rates, you'll see that they have a much higher percentage rate of pass on their tests than in previous years. So again, I don't know if that's true. I think that's just my opinion as far as what I'm seeing coming out into the field, and people that are passing the test but really have no concept of what's E&M coding. They have no concept of what that is. They have no concept of like a global period. They have no concept of things that they really should know and should be able to hit the ground running, knowing, and they're passing these tests. And so because of that, AAPC has come out with the apprenticeship designation that they attach to these credentials because people don't have the experience to be able to go out and hit the ground running. So I think that that's, certainly shifted the dynamics of the industry pretty heavily. And I think that despite a lot of people hating that apprenticeship designation, it is an important marker for competency and for distinction between the folks that are seasoned and the folks that really have no work history, but you can't see that if you're just looking at a credential. So I think AAPC is a for-profit company. We'll talk about AHIMA. AHIMA is not a for-profit company. They're a non-for-profit. So the motives are going to be quite different. For-profit companies have shareholders and they have profits that they're constantly looking at. So there's been this push to add all of these additional certifications, and the certifications do not hold the same merit or the same value that some of the more popular ones have. And I can only guess that is, for financial reasons. It could be for other reasons, but there's definitely financial incentives involved with members and certifications and CEUs and all of the things that go with maintaining your credentials. With the AAPC, I will say that the chapter network, in my experience, having been a member of the AHIMA or a member of AHIMA and AAPC, the chapter network is much more robust. It's much more extensive. I feel much more connected. We'll talk about, my experience with AHIMA when we get to that in a minute. But I do think that the AAPC has done a really great job of promoting that chapter network and leveraging volunteers almost to the point where people are burned out, to be able to foster that community and to be able to foster that mentorship that is so very necessary to be successful in the industry. As far as membership dues, so I went and pulled my membership dues so that everybody would know. It was $190 to renew my AAPC membership. So that's, it's not cheap. And the more organizations that you're a part of, the more membership dues you have to pay. With that membership, you do get a lot. You get a lot for your money. A lot of people say, oh, we're just paying all of these dues. We don't really get anything. You actually get a lot. So you get obviously your ability to maintain your credentials. You get access to some free CEUs. You can be a part of the local chapter network where you can get, free CEUs by going to the meetings. There's also all of these different membership discounts. Like you can get discounted health insurance, travel, entertainment. Like they have tons of discounts that I don't think even the members realize that they can tap into, that you get for that membership. They also have a much more robust website. They've got a mobile application, so you can log in, you can see your credentials, you can look at your magazine. You also get Healthcare Business Monthly. As part of that membership fee, you can have a paper copy sent to you or an electronic copy. All of those things cost money to produce. So I do think, there is value that's packed into that price. So those are, just some of my thoughts and experiences with the AAPC. So now let's dive into AHIMA. So Stacy, you said that you're a lifer. That made me think of some of the early credentials. Talk to us about AHIMA.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been a member with them like forever. I remember the first time, it was 1994 when I went to my first Florida Health Information Management Association like annual conference. And that was before I was even in school, for the profession. When I had switched jobs, my boss is like, I have no interest in going. She's like, do you want to go? We'll pay for you to go. And it was like, in Fort Lauderdale. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll go. And so that was kind of how I got my first exposure, to the association. And then eventually I got into the HIM program. And then once you get into the HIM program, you start attending local chapter meetings. So I was going to school in Miami. So I was a member of the South Florida chapter for many years, going to their meetings. And then it was always encouraged to join as a student member of AHIMA. So I probably first joined them officially as a member back in 1996. So I can't wait until I hit my 30 years, because at FHIMA, they recognize the people who are 30-year members. So in the near future, I'm going to be that 30-year member. You get to see all the old people who've been members for 30 years or longer. They give you that recognition there. But back in the day, I mean, so again, I've been a member, since the 90s. It was very different. It was a very different organization from what it is now. So I've seen a lot of changes over the years, and I've been very involved I'm trying to think, the first time I got involved, I want to say at the state level. Like, I jumped in and I didn't do anything at the local regional association level. I actually got my first volunteer experience going to the state association, and I was a committee chair, I think around the year 2000. So for 22 years, I've been serving in some capacity for FHIMA. And so that was really my first time, diving in at the state level. And then I was a committee chair again, the following year. And then I ended up running for the board of directors and getting, on the board, and eventually was FHIMA president, which was amazing. That was probably one of the best experiences of my life. And at the same time I was on the state board, I was also running the regional association and serving on the board and being president of the regional association twice. So it was hard to recruit volunteers back then. And it's still hard like now. I don't think that that's a new problem. We've always struggled to get people to step up and serve in these positions. But one of the things that, I like about the organization, I feel like it's very easy to volunteer for them. You really don't have barriers to volunteering like you used to, or serving in leadership positions like you used to, because many years ago, AHIMA came up with this concept of, quote, open membership, where before you had to be an active member, you had to be credentialed to be an active voting member. And then many years ago, they made a change that anybody could join AHIMA as an active member. So you can be active, non-credentialed, and then you could be voting, and then you can also be serving in positions that you wouldn't have been able to before if you weren't credentialed. So they kind of expanded it there. And I used to always be a proponent of join AHIMA for all of the membership benefits. But early in my career, I was more traditional. I was in a more traditional HIM role for many years before I actually got into coding, and then eventually became more niche. So as I moved out of the traditional setting and I'm going into, more niche, and I'm getting more into revenue cycle, and I'm getting more into coding and compliance, then I felt like AHIMA didn't really have as much value to me anymore because of where their focus was. Back then it was about acute care hospitals. That was the dominant, setting. And that is what they were geared towards. And while the majority of their members back then were coders, I don't know what the demographics are now at the national level, but, they had more coders in the organization than they had RHIAs and RHITs, which was very interesting. Because it seemed like most everything was geared towards your RHIAs, RHITs, and in that hospital setting. And then over the years, as the profession has become more diverse, and you have people who aren't in those traditional roles, that they're serving in other capacities and organizations, it's almost like that value of that membership diminishes for those people, because then they go to specialty organizations. Like you have ACTIS, for CDI. AHIMA has a CDI credential, but there aren't a lot of people that, hold that credential. It's like they were kind of late to the game there. Like ACTIS, took that ball and ran with it. And they're this huge organization. You have a lot of people who are members of HIMS because of the role that they work in HIM. It's HIMS, fits their needs better. So I feel like with AHIMA, it's good that there are so many opportunities within the health information management, but from the organizational perspective, you can't meet the needs of all of those people. So where are you going to put your focus? And I even feel like with coders, they've kind of lost their, focus over the years with the coders. And I don't see a whole lot there. And when we're talking about coding, AHIMA is still known for hospital coding. That is what they're known for. They are not known for presence over on the physician, side, the pro-fee side in the profession. So I think that's a big distinguishing factor between AHIMA and AAPC. And then for years, AAPC was known as pro-fee coding. And then they started getting into all the specialty credentials. And now you see AAPC also getting into inpatient. They've got an inpatient credential. They're trying to get more into that hospital market and kind of, take market share away from AHIMA, which I think they have a good opportunity for doing. I feel like AHIMA dropped the ball, completely missed the boat on specialty coding credentials, didn't do anything with that. They do have the CCSP, which I have. Tony, I think you have the CCSP. Do you have the CCSP from AHIMA? No, you don't have that
I have
one.
the CCS.
Okay, so you have the CCS. So I have the CCSP, which is supposed to be that physician coding credential. Nobody really looks for that. Nobody asks for that. It's not something that's really out there. When you're talking pro-fee, people are looking for that CPC. So I feel like, again, AHIMA is still geared towards hospital, coding, that's like where they're at, and they haven't like moved away. So to kind of, go back to what I was talking about. So over the years for me, they've become less significant. And now I'm like, well, is there really value in membership for me? And I'm like, not particularly. And I think I might have said this in a past episode. The only reason that I pay my membership dues mainly is I was serving on the FHIMA board. Like if you're serving in that capacity, you have to be a member. You have to be an active member. So you have to pay your dues. Outside of that, is there anything that I get from the organization? Not really as far as that's concerned. And I also feel like they've gone, and I think we touched on this in a past episode as well, where they're focused on that higher level of education. They're focused on the bachelor's, level and the master's level, and they're pushing PhDs. And while higher education is a great thing, the majority of your members are not at those higher education levels. And you can encourage them to aspire to those higher education levels and get those degrees. But where is the value for those people who only have the high school diploma, let's say, who are coders or only have that associate's degree when you're trying to elevate the profession? I almost feel like it would be like in their best interest if they split and had two separate organizations, honestly. Because I feel like if you're like AAPC is very focused, they're in the coding space. That's all they're worried about. And everything they do is about coding in some type of form. And AHIMA, I feel, has lost ground because they're trying to manage the diversity. They're not doing well. They were in a lot of financial trouble and struggling, a few years back. And then they were nixing programs and changing all kinds of things and making changes behind the scene. And they've managed to turn things around. But they were in some serious trouble. So anyway, I feel that the changes for AHIMA, again, this is my opinion, I don't think they've been for the better. Some people may disagree with that. Again, I think it depends on what work setting you're in and whether or not you see value. And like I said, even with AAPC, I don't see a ton of value there, only because this is for me personally, is because I'm in such a niche. It's like, what are you giving me for my specialty, that I'm working in? You're not. I mean, I can do general education through them, but I could do general education through anyone. But I have to be a member of them to keep my credential. Like that's where they kind of like have you, and where it's a great financial model, because if you want the credential, you've got to pay the membership fee. You have no choice. Now with AHIMA, you don't have to be a member. You can just, have your credential separate. And it used to be cheaper to be a non-member and just pay your recertification fee. But because they were having financial difficulties and looking at ways of making more money, and so many people were not becoming members, they upped the recertification fees like ridiculously high. So you're kind of like, depending on how many credentials you have, it's kind of a wash if you pay an annual membership fee versus like the recertification fee. So they've kind of forced people to pay the same amount of money regardless of what choice they make. And I get that from a business perspective. I would do the same thing. I don't know why they didn't do it a lot sooner for that situation. So for me, AHIMA has helped me advance in my career. That's where I have spent most of my time. I started out in traditional. If I had entered the profession in coding and I had gone into coding and had been working in coding, I would have been with AAPC probably only exclusively, and I would have gotten credentialed through them. And I would be a lifer for AAPC if my career had started out differently at that point in time, because I really don't see, for what I'm doing now, there's not value to the credentials that I hold with AHIMA. So it's just how my career has evolved. So a do-over, I'd probably do things a little bit differently and join AAPC sooner and not maybe get the second credential, the coding credential if you're AHIMA. But once you get it, you're not going to let go of it. You keep doing your CEs and you keep paying your renewal. You don't want to, you did all that hard work, you did the studying and you earned it. So that's just a little bit of, my experience, with AHIMA. So I would encourage it from a networking perspective. Both organizations, I think, are great for networking. And then just depending upon, what you want to do. And I know, Tony, we're going to get into that as far as which one is better and how to make that decision.
Yeah, definitely. Victoria, what do you think about AHIMA?
So I am not a member of AHIMA. I have in the past toyed with the idea of becoming a member of AHIMA. I've toyed with getting my CCS. Personally, I find AHIMA compared to the AAPC to be a little bit elitist. Because of how they have been in the past with promoting, oh, you have to have this degree to get the RHIT and RHIA, which I understand. Like those are credentials that are more higher tier credentials, and we there's definitely room for those in the industry, and we should have them in the industry. They're not really 100% coding credentials, and there is definitely a need for them in certain situations. However, I feel like in the past, and not recently, but in the past, like years ago, when I was kind of looking into getting into AHIMA, it was just going on the website was very confusing as trying to figure out like what I needed to do, my qualifications had to be. I feel like in the past, and maybe I just remember it incorrectly, but I feel like in the past you did have to have some higher experience in order to even go for like a CCS versus what you do now. And maybe I'm just remembering that incorrectly. Um, but even so now looking at it, it's kind of like, well, you could have this, or maybe you could have this. And then here's a whole manual of all of the information that you need to know in order to sit for this certification. And it's confusing to me because, it's different than what I've dealt with in the AAPC where, our exams, they all change January 1, calendar year January 1. AHIMA certifications are very different. It sounds like there's some time frames where you can use the prior year's books, but then it changes over. And then there's these beta periods. Like just trying to navigate all of that is very confusing. And I used to have viewers that would be on my channel and they'd say, hey, I heard that I can't mark up my books for AHIMA exams. And I looked in the manual and I didn't really see a lot of stuff. So I called them up and they're like, well, here's where it is. And it says that you're kind of like not supposed to write in your exams. But then I'll hear tons of other people going, yeah, I went into the exam center with my exam book completely marked up and it wasn't a problem. So it's gotten to the point where it's like I feel like it wouldn't be worth it to me to get an additional credential through AHIMA. I think if I wanted to get an inpatient credential at this time, even though AHIMA is more known for inpatient coding, I would probably go for the CIC with the AAPC because I just feel like it would just be too much of a stark contrast and too much of a barrier. I think having to pay membership fees or credentialing fees, and even that is confusing versus the recertification versus you have to pay for a membership. And I'm not saying it's bad, it's just that it's so different from what I'm used to dealing with the AAPC. It's unusual waters to have to navigate. Now, having said that, I've done presentations in the past for AHIMA chapters, which always feels weird to me because, again, they are known for inpatient coding. So when I come and talk pro fee, I feel like, are you sure you really want me to come and speak? Because I'm only going to be speaking about pro fee stuff. I don't know PCS coding. I don't know, UBO for anything. I only do pro fee coding. But I have spoken for 2 different AHIMA chapters, the Lehigh Valley and I think the Harrisburg chapter. And during the pandemic, that was a little bit different, the one that I was speaking to during the pandemic, because, with AAPC, we have our local chapters. You can hop in, you can go in virtually, watch the presentation, get your CEU. With the AHIMA, they were only like, you have to pre-record it. And then I guess they had to pay extra for it. So even that seems unusual to me, to make your members on top of their membership fees have to pay for the CEs through their local organization. So,
Well,
yeah.
I can say for the regions, each region is different. So they can kind of do what they want to do. So they some regions offer all free as part of the membership fee.
Okay.
Some kind of do a hybrid where some are paid and some are free. It's kind of like a mixture of what they want to do, which I see that similar to AAPC chapters. Like I've spoken at AAPC chapter meetings where they've charged,
Mhm.
for that meeting, and I'm there to speak for them. So yeah, it just depends. You maybe have been in situations where they were paid meetings and hopefully they paid you if they're collecting money. Because that's typically what we would do. We would ask people to speak for free, but you also have money to be able to do things, or we would do like hotel meetings. And so we're collecting money from you to feed you at the hotel. We're not necessarily trying to get rich off of you, but all
Right.
the local HIM chapters all kind of have discretion to do what they want with their meetings.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense then. Yeah, I can see that. But yeah, it's just I just feel like at this point, I feel like AHIMA is starting to feel a little dated, and they might have some work to do to kind of keep up with some of the trends that are going on with the industry that AAPC, I'm not saying has cornered or has mastered in any way, but has definitely has their um, hands in and is making some movements in that direction.
Totally. So I've been an AHIMA member since 2013. Um, I first got my AHIMA approved ICD-10 CMM PCS trainer. I was one of the first people to get that designation, and this was really hot back then because, as many of you know, ICD-10 was supposed to be implemented in 2013 and 2014, and then finally happened in 2015. So they rode that train pretty hard. And then shortly after that, I got my CCS, which is the proficiency for both inpatient and outpatient coding. I feel like back then it was considered more prestigious to become certified with the HEMA because there were really strict requirements. You had to have a certain number of years of experience. I think it was like 2 years before you could even take the tests. You had to have like certain college courses. Like I feel like the threshold or the minimum criteria to even be able to sit for the exam was a lot different than it is now. So I got my C. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say real quickly that they've switched back and forth on that, where there was like no criteria and anybody could sit for it. And then, because I had students taking it who hadn't finished their education and had no experience of passing it. Then they came in years later and said, oh, nope, we're going to put in these requirements. And then they were in for a while. And then they're like, oh, nope, we're going to remove the requirements. So they've kind of flip-flopped back and forth. And I think that's a revenue decision by removing the requirements again, I believe, trying to get more credentialed people and also more members.
Right. Yeah. So back then, I feel like it was just considered a lot more prestigious to be certified with the HEMA. So I wanted to be doing both. At the time, I was working in consulting, and we were doing a lot of consulting projects with facilities. So inpatient coding, like critical access hospitals, federally qualified health centers, where you had to really understand the principles of inpatient billing and coding. So I felt like back then it was incredibly necessary. And it was also, again, it was kind of looked at really prestigiously to be certified with the HEMA, but to have both, I feel like back then it was just kind of looked at like, wow, okay. As far as my experience with the HEMA, I would say that I can definitely relate to what Victoria said about the organization being very elitist. I've always felt like they have kind of shunned people like me that don't have bachelor's degrees, don't have master's degrees. And the reason why I say this is because if you look at the requirements to volunteer for any of the board of director positions, they all require degrees. If you look at just some of the literature that's out there, they're very much like, if you don't have a bachelor's degree, if you don't have a master's degree, if you don't have a PhD, you really shouldn't be a part of our organization. That's how I felt. They've heavily promoted these things. And I definitely think there's a financial incentive because they've aligned with these college programs. And, obviously I don't know if they get kickbacks from that, but there's got to be some type of incentive relationship. I remember it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. The employer that I was working with, AHIMA, had contacted us to do something called an on-the-job apprenticeship program where they basically got some type of funding from the government to do apprenticeship for coders. And again, I just think kind of looking at my experience historically and the different things that they've done like that, and just promoting all of these like college degree programs that you absolutely don't need unless you're trying to do that very specific job. That's just kind of changed my opinion of the organization, because again, I don't think that, we've talked about this in our previous episode, you don't need a college degree to be successful in this industry, and to propagate that falsehood, I think, is just a disservice to everybody in the industry. So my experience with AHIMA, obviously there's value with the credentials that I have. As far as the membership benefits, I don't really see the membership benefits. I pay $135 a year for annual membership. We used to have to pay recertification fees. I don't think they even do that anymore. We used to have to pay for, I think it was annual self-reviews. So you had to take tests every year or every other year to maintain your certifications. And every time I did that, it was the worst experience because the website would crash. You would be doing this like 2-hour test and you get to the end and then the website just like crashes and you have to start over. I remember that happening to me multiple times. And then you'd contact the help desk and you would have to wait on hold for 2 hours, or you might not get anybody that could actually help you. So I feel like the infrastructure is definitely not there in terms of, customer support. The website is insanely outdated. They have not, if they have upgraded it, it has not been done well. It's very outdated. I feel like they're stuck in the 90s. I think the organization as a whole has a lot of growth and they've missed a lot of opportunity. Stacy talked about that, with Actis and some of the specialty organizations, and AAPC, I think, has obviously done a good job of cornering the market on certain areas. And now they're trying to dip their heels into inpatient coding, which I think is going to take some time because nobody really knows what the CIC is. Facilities and hospitals are looking for the CCS or the RHIA or the RHIT. They're not looking for the CIC. I haven't seen anybody that's advertising that the CIC is an appropriate credential for inpatient coding. So, that's been some of my experience. I do think that the tests are harder. The tests that I took for AHIMA were harder than the certification tests I took for AAPC, mostly because they actually require you to code out cases without multiple choice, which I think is so important because you want to find out if somebody knows what they're doing, give them nothing and tell them to code everything from scratch, because you'll be able to tell very quickly if people know what they're doing. So I will say the exams are more difficult. They tend to be more restrictive of who can serve in various positions. I also think that, they have done a really good job of going into areas like information governance and like data and all of the healthcare data analytics. They've done a great job of going into those areas. But at the same time, they've lost a lot of traction with, CDI and risk adjustment and all of these different areas that I think that they could have been successful in had they, played their cards a little bit differently. AHIMA has been around since 1928, which I think is really crazy. They were first called the Association of Record Librarians of North America, which is like so funny to me. So they've been in the game a lot longer than AAPC, which explains why some of, the things are outdated and antiquated and that sort of thing. But overall, I would say both organizations have certainly helped and contributed to my success. But as far as value from the organization, I would definitely say AAPC has been a better experience for me. The local chapter support for AHIMA is just not there. They have the state association, but I think that, obviously no offense to you, Stacy, but as far as engaging members and some of the things that they do for members, I have not personally seen a lot of value in it.
Yeah, I think the value for a lot of people depends upon where you're working, like the setting that you work in and like what you're doing. I think that's where we have the disconnect, like on the value when they're geared towards, one avenue. I think on a national level, this is the thing. It's like on the national level, you have AHIMA that sets the stage, and then it trickles down to the state, and then it trickles down to the local regions. And I would say the local regions probably have the most freedom and autonomy still. But one thing, having been on the board, 2 decades ago, and then being back on now, and multiple times, I've seen how we used to have a lot more autonomy at the state level on how we do things and how we manage the organization. And over the years, AHIMA has taken more control. We have contractual obligations and things that we have to do on behalf of AHIMA, policies we have to follow. We cannot deviate. We're signing, as a state association, all kinds of agreements with them on how to do things, and it's just become like a nightmare. Like, I think about when I was president, I had a lot of autonomy when I was president from 2007 to 2008. If I were to become president now, I wouldn't have near as much autonomy in running the state association, just because national has all of these requirements. And then the state now has to have more control over the regions because of all the legalities and like all this other stuff. So that's one reason why you don't see a lot of deviation. I personally have always been a proponent at the state level. Can we please reach out to people in other settings? Can we please go into the professional fee setting, that physician setting, and reach out to those people? And as much as I talk about it, when the majority of the people, in leadership aren't in that setting, it does not happen. So it's kind of fallen short there. But I just want to tag on to a few things that you were saying about HIMA. So about like the credential thing, like I kind of touched on this already. They missed the boat on coding credentials. Like, they want to have specialty credentials, but I feel like they're always late to the game. Like with the CDIP, that was like too late, and Actis has that, whatever. The funny thing was, when it came to specialty credentials, when HIPAA was coming about, they had the privacy and security credentials that they put into place. And a lot of us said, why in the hell are you creating these credentials? Your HIM credentials are privacy and security. We already know this. We already do this. Why are you creating a new credential? And that's why you don't see a ton of people hold. I mean, I don't know what the percentage of membership is that holds those credentials, but it's pretty darn low, compared to the pool of people you have. It's like, if you are an RHIA or an RHIT, you have that training. You don't need a separate credential. So why they went that direction to add a new credential is beyond me. It made like no sense there. And then you talked about it being like an elitist organization, and myself, again, being a lifer, I feel it's an elitist organization, like as a member. And I've said that as a board member for the state association. I've always been on record that I feel that they're an elitist organization, and they do cater to the higher level of education. But I think part of the thought process is that in more recent years, they've had this fear of like losing ground to like HIMSS, because HIMSS has taken a big chunk of what the HIM profession like did. And these are higher level, degrees, and, they're thinking about informatics, and they're thinking about the future. And while I get that, that's fine. You cannot neglect those other people in the organization. If all of those credentialed coders, let's say all of those high school diploma people and all those associate's degree people decided, I'm done with you, I'm pulling out, they're done, because that's how they make like a lot of their money. So I feel like they should, step into that, a little bit more, and just not be short-sighted. So I don't feel like their changes are for the better. You mentioned the website. They have done work on the website. They have made improvements to the website. The one thing I've noticed in the website area and other things they do, when they put money into something to make it better, it's never better. Sometimes it's worse. So there's clearly a struggle there. And I don't need to tell you guys customer service complaints that are all over social media. I mean, about the website and customer service in general, that's an ongoing problem. AAPC is much better in those areas. I can say that from experience. So, and again, there's a difference, for-profit versus, nonprofit organization. It's just run differently. It's managed differently. Obviously, AHIMA needs to make money, but AAPC, again, has freedom that AHIMA does not have, given its nonprofit, structure. And then technically, it's governed by the members through the House of Delegates to a certain degree. The members have control over certain things that have to be voted on. So that's where there's a big difference, where AAPC can just, rule the world and do whatever they want to do, being that privately held company. We're all business owners. And I'm like, I would never want to be publicly held and be answering to like stockholders like ever or anything like that. So I like being able to like do my own thing.
Totally. All right, so we've kind of already answered this question, but let's go around. So do you need to be a member of both? Is one better than the other?
So
Stacy?
I think it's going to depend on where, what job you have. If you're in a more traditional role, then AHIMA would definitely be the way to go. If you're working in a hospital setting, then AHIMA is probably a good fit for you. If you are not in the hospital setting, I honestly would encourage you to look at other specialty organizations, depending upon, what part of the industry you're working in. Coding, I mean, I hate to say this, AHIMA, as an AHIMA lifer by default, but AAPC kicks your ass when it comes to like coding. So if you want to be in coding and only work in coding, then I would lean towards AAPC. But if you want to do hospital coding, there's value. So I would say if you want to do hospital coding, I'd probably recommend both. That would be my recommendation if you have the ability to afford the fees in both. If you're not interested in the hospital setting, then I don't really see any value in going over to AHIMA because you can find what you're looking for through AAPC and other specialty organizations that are out there.
So I'm gonna kind of echo that. Yeah, I don't think you need to be a member of both. I could see it being beneficial maybe if you are managing a team that has a mixed supply of both AAPC and AHIMA certified members, and knowing how to kind of navigate the waters of both. But I think if you're someone who's just starting out today, you probably only need to join one or the other. And the only benefit of AHIMA is if you know that you want to get into inpatient coding. If you know, like, I want to be an inpatient coder, that's what I want to do, definitely go with AHIMA. Otherwise, I just feel like there's a lot more room to expand with the AAPC, especially you mentioned risk adjustment. There aren't any risk adjustment credentials that AHIMA has. So if you want to get into that, if you want to get into pro-fee coding, obviously the AAPC is the correct choice. And there's a lot more room to expand. We have the specialty credentials. We have different opportunities. There's trainings that now won't give you a quote unquote credential, but you'll get a certificate for completing them if you do like behavioral health training, and different aspects like that. I did want to mention before this slips my mind again. So we talked about how the AAPC has their apprenticeship designation. If you don't have 2 years of experience or the equivalent in medical coding, you have to you're designated as an apprentice coder and you have to work towards getting that removed. So one of the things that the CEO of the AAPC has been talking about for the past year is they are stating now, as far as who, when, where, when, and why, and how this is going to happen. But they've stated that they are putting some different, I guess, training modules or something, or some sort of programs online that they are stating will eventually replace the need for the apprenticeship status. Exactly how that's going to look or when that's going to roll out remains to be seen, because I know sometimes the organization has the best of intentions to roll something out. Like, I think for the past 2 years now, we've been saying we're going to put all the rest of the exams able to be tested online and not just the CPC, and it's just gets delayed and delayed and delayed. So that is something that is on that publicly on the record that they are working on. So we'll see.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, AAPC, if you're watching this, please take all of your exams online, or at least send them to testing centers. On behalf of all chapter officers, we'd like to stop giving up our Saturdays and our Sundays. No, I just think, I mean, okay, so that's another thing that I think AHIMA does better than AAPC. So all of their tests are in a facility, a third-party facility, and everything is, you find out like that day. If you pass, you don't have to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks, right? There's also, you know, Victoria and I could probably talk about this. There's a bit of a margin for error when it comes to proctoring AAPC exams. So AAPC exams are proctored by volunteers. The first proctor has to be an officer. The second proctor can be a volunteer. But think about this. If you've got 10 people that read a list of rules and guidelines, you're probably going to have a bunch of people that have different interpretations and different feelings and thoughts about those rules. Can you just imagine all of these different people proctoring and what they're allowing, what they're not allowing? Like, yikes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I've had people commenting on my videos, even, that they'll say, oh, well, you said that this wasn't allowed, but I was allowed to do it for my exam. I was allowed to bring my medical dictionary along. And I'm like, okay, for the CPC exam, yes, absolutely. Okay, well, now I have to report that out because and I think there's this confusion because you are allowed to bring like a medical dictionary for certain certifications. And if it's a proctor who it's maybe only their first time doing it and they're coming around to check and they just look at it and kind of go, oh, yeah, here it says medical dictionary, they might make that connection and think, oh, yeah, that's okay for all of the exams. And it's not. So, yeah, you do hear about.
You still have the issue with the testing centers. Like, with AHIMA, their instructions, you're not supposed to write in your book. But clearly you can go to a testing center, and in some testing centers, people are there with writing in their books, and that's like not supposed to be. So that's not foolproof, either. And then with AAPC, you're talking about proctoring. Somebody told me, this was somebody who went through my course and then took the exam. And she was going for like a retake. She'd already taken it and she went through my course. And then she mentioned, oh, you're allowed to bring a reference of your choice. So if I wanted to, like, I could bring your book or I could bring Dr. Z's book. And I'm like, I don't think that's correct. And then I've heard that people have done that. And I'm like, no, like I haven't escalated that like anywhere and gotten into it. But I'm like, no, you're allowed to have vascular illustrations. But beyond that, that's the only thing unique to that CIRCC exam where you can bring in your illustrations for the vascular order, but nothing else.
It's funny because they actually don't define what is an additional reference of your choice for the credentials where you are allowed to bring one. Like I was allowed to bring a reference of my choice for my plastic surgery exam, and they don't tell you like what is and is not acceptable, other than I think maybe they say that you can't bring the study guide or something. And I brought, I think it was like a little red plastic surgery for residents book where they kind of like outline all the different procedures kind of look like from a resident perspective. So that's what I took, because it honestly, it doesn't tell you what reference you are and aren't allowed to bring.
Yeah, it's a complete shit show thinking about all the different twists and turns that these exams take and the proctors that you're getting and how conservative they are, how liberal they are. Like, yeah, what's funny is that I don't remember this being a thing when I took my exams for AHIMA. I don't remember you not being able to mark up your books. I definitely had my books marked up. Like, I don't remember that at all.
I remember when I took the CCSP, there was one part of the exam you had to have your books locked up in the locker. You couldn't have your books. And then when you came back into the second part of the exam, then you could use your coding books. So that's like serious. Like you had to like know your stuff. When you got to the actual coding of the cases, obviously you needed them. But that first part, nope, your books were in the locker at the testing center until you were finished part one. And then you went and got your books and came back and finished your test.
That's
yeah,
wild.
and then the other thing that I think is confusing with the AHIMA is I get a lot of questions about the tabbing. And in the instructions, it says you're not allowed to put in any homemade tabs in your book. And they're like, well, does homemade include the ones that come in the book? And I'm like, well, for my thought process, those aren't homemade. They're already in the book. You should be able to use those. And then other people will go, yeah, I had all kinds of tabs and writing in my book and it wasn't a problem. So who knows?
Who the heck knows? Yeah. Just to wrap up with that last question. So no, you don't need to be a member of both. I think what both Stacy and Victoria said about if you want to go into hospital or inpatient coding or data privacy or anything like that, go the AHIMA route. Otherwise, AAPC is going to be probably a much more solid choice for you. There are also some really amazing specialty organizations out there. So if you're a more higher level, like NAMUS, the National Alliance of Medical Auditing Specialists, they are more higher level for auditing and compliance professionals. I think that those kind of specialty organizations are going to be really big in the next few years. We're going to see a lot of traction with those organizations because AAPC is trying to do everything, right? They're trying to do inpatient, they're trying to do outpatient. Now they're trying to do practice management, compliance, like they're saturating the market with all of these like very generic credentials. And that is not a good solution when you get into the more higher level tiers. So I think NAMUS is the future of auditing and compliance. And you're going to see a lot more specialty organizations. All right. So a couple quick questions. What's your hardest credential that you ever sat for? Stacy?
I mean, I don't think any of them were hard. I mean, I'm a pretty good test taker. So the thing is, people are going to be like, you have the CIRCC. Okay. I had been coding interventional radiology for 8 years before I sat for that exam. Okay. Because I didn't want to be a member of AAPC. I never wanted to be. But when I started teaching my course and I want to help people get the CIRCC, I kind of should have it myself. So I went and did it. I finished that 150 question test in 3 hours and 10 minutes. And people were like shocked. I got up and walked out of the room that quick because you're taking all exams, but they probably thought I gave up and walked out of the room. I was mad because I wanted to do it in under 3 hours, and it was 3 hours and 10 minutes. So by the time I took that, it was easy. The RHIA was pretty easy. Again, I finished that quickly. I was out the door before everybody else in the room with me. Back when it was a paper exam. Oh my gosh, once a year. I would say probably the hardest one would have been the CCSP that I took because I didn't have a lot of exposure to CPT coding. And when I took that, I hadn't done any E&M coding. I had only been coding in radiology and coding laboratory. So that one I performed the worst on. I still performed well, but it was my lowest score just because I didn't do the other specialties. And then the ones I have through RCCB, those are radiology coding credentials. And again, I was already doing it and took them. So I didn't have any struggles with my credentialing exam. So sorry if that makes people go, shut up, Stacy.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
I found them all pretty easy. So.
V, what about you?
Yeah, when you take those specialty credentials and you're already working in the specialty, like it's almost a race of how fast you can finish them, right? Like I was the same way when I took plastics. I think I finished, 1 or 2 hours or ahead of time. The hardest I took was my COC, what was my outpatient coding one. I don't know, when I went into it, I was thinking outpatient coding like surgical centers. I'm like, oh, this is going to be nothing but like day surgery. It's going to be lap choles and appies and lipoma removals. And there was a lot more questions about payment methodologies that I was a little unsure about. There was a lot more like cardiac procedures that I was not super familiar with. So I think the COC, the certified outpatient coding credential, was definitely the hardest one I took. I was not 100% confident about my passing on that, but I actually did pretty well from what I recall.
That's cool. My hardest one was the CCS, certified coding specialist through AHIMA. Inpatient coding. Oh, I did it actually before PCS was a thing. We were still figuring out PCS. So that was the hardest one for me. Okay, cool. So now I want to do something fun. We're going to do a surprise trivia game. It's going to be Stacy versus Victoria. They have no idea.
You didn't tell me it was going to pit us against each other. Oh, God. Okay.
I'm going to be keeping score. So I've got a few questions for you guys. The reason why I didn't tell you is because you might Google them and cheat and, whatever. So I'm going to ask the question, and whoever answers the fastest is going to get the point for that round. We've got 14 questions.
Oh my gosh. It's too late in the day for 14 questions. So I need to have to use my brain.
Do quick. So I'm going to keep score. We're going to do a little fun trivia.
If it's not about radiology coding, I'm not going to know it. Okay. I'll just go on record right now. If it's anything about coding, Victoria is going to kick my ass completely.
Oh, no.
Not coding. Okay. So you're a lifer for AHIMA. You're also part of AAPC. So they're all questions just about AAPC and AHIMA. Okay. All right. So once we start, whoever says the correct answer first gets the point. Okay. All right. Ready? Drum roll. How many credentials does the AAPC offer?
36.
Ooh.
My answer is a shitload. Is that closer?
I counted 30, so we're 36. All right, that's 1 for V. All right. And then we've got Stacy. Okay, how many credentials does AHIMA offer?
10.
4. No, shit.
The correct answer is 8. But okay, so who was closest? You were closest. All right, yeah. So you get the point on that one. All right. Now we're going to get into the abbreviations of some of these credentials.
Oh God.
Okay.
This is an AAPC credential. What is the CPPM?
Certified Professional Practice Manager.
Yes.
I know nothing about AAPC credentials.
This is an AHIMA credential. The CHDA.
Certified in Health Data Analytics.
You got it, Stacy. All right, you guys are neck and neck, 2 and 2. Okay. The next credential is an AAPC credential. It's the CDEI.
Certified Documentation Expert Outpatient.
Inpatient.
It's inpatient.
Inpatient.
Oh, did you say? Oh, you said I. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Stacy's up. Okay, the next one is an AAPC credential. It's the CPEDC.
Certified Professional. CP. Certified Professional.
Emergency Department coder.
You would think, right? You would think. It's Certified Pediatric Coder.
Okay.
Right.
I know. I thought that was one, but there's actually one called this. I won't tell you. Okay, so the next one. All right, so for that one, that's nobody got that one. The next one is an AAPC credential, the CRHC.
CRA. Certified Rheumatoid. No. Certified CRHC.
Why do I feel like you're asking more AAPC questions? I feel like this contest is fixed.
I'm feeling dyslexic now. CRHC.
He only has 8 credentials.
The fix is in. They're all AAPC questions.
Certified.
You were really close, Victoria. Keep going down that path.
What is it? Rheumatology.
Certified Rheumatology Hematology Coder.
Certified Rheumatology Coder.
I was going to say hematology, but that's part of the other one, the HOMC, whatever that is, or yeah.
So that's a no-go. Yeah, certified rheumatology coder. The reason why I'm saying this and doing these questions is because there's like ridiculous alphabet soup with all these credentials. How does anybody even know what this stuff means? Like,
I'm gonna just start adding letters onto the end of my name now. No one's even gonna know.
No one's even gonna know. Okay, so the next one is an AHIMA credential, the CHPS.
Certified Healthcare Privacy Security.
Yes. All right, Stacy, you're up for Victoria's 2.
Damn it. That's not right.
All right, the next one is AAPC, the COPC. COPC.
Certified Ophthalmology Coder.
Yep. I know some of these are tricky. All right. The next one is a AAPC credential. All right. It's a long one. The CCVTC.
That's the Certified Cardiothoracic and Vascular Coder.
Certified Cardiovascular Thoracic Coder.
That's
Almost.
what I said.
So it's the Certified Cardiovascular and Thoracic Surgery Coder. That's what it stands for, but you got it almost. So I'll give you that one. Okay, so Stacy's at 5, Victoria's at 3. Everything could change in these last few.
Oh my god. Are we gonna go to double jeopardy at the end?
A sudden death round.
Yeah. None of the other questions asked except for this last one that I
This is fun. See? All right. The next one is AAPC. This is the CANPC. CANPC.
Certified.
No Googling.
You're looking down. Are you cheating?
No, I'm literally writing them down so that I can remember what the letters are. CANPC.
Even if I write them down, I'm not going to know what they're for.
Certified Anesthesia Coder? No. Is that it?
Close.
Certified.
Anesthesia and pain management
Pain
coder.
management code.
You were close. All right, so we're neck and neck. Stacy's at 5, Victoria's at 4. The next one is an AAPC credential. The C, A is in Apple, S is in Sam, C, CASCC.
Certified Ambulatory Surgical Center Coder.
Yep. Some of these like acronyms are a little bit misleading.
Hello,
right.
We need some AHIMA questions here.
All right, so the next one is an AAPC credential.
I told you it was fixed. Totally fixed from the beginning.
No, I've got one more, and it's AHIMA.
She's an AAPC board member, for God's sake. She should know these.
I know.
Okay, the next one is a CEDC.
Certified Emergency Department Coder.
Yes. See, I would think that the CPEDC would be the CEDC, right? Like the pediatric one, it's a little bit confusing. All right, so Victoria's up 6, Stacy's 5. We got our
How
last
did we get to
question here.
6-5? I thought that tied it at 5-5.
Well, because that's what I wrote down. Okay, the last one, the most important one, okay?
You said you had 14 questions, so that doesn't sound like 14 questions.
Neither of us got
Neither
wrong.
one of you guys got, so I threw those
Oh,
out.
there were 2 that neither one of us got, I think.
That's right. So Victoria has 6, you have 5, so that gives us 11, 12, 13, and then we've got one more, so we've got 14 total.
I still think you messed up the score, but whatever. Continue.
Okay. So the last one is AHIMA. It's the CDIP.
Certified Documentation Improvement
Practitioner.
Yep.
P. I'm like, what the heck is that P for?
All right. So Victoria, you are our grand champion for
Fixed. It was mostly AAPC questions, totally fixed.
Okay. AAPC has 30 certifications. AHIMA's 8. I couldn't pick the CCS and the CCSP because obviously everybody knows what those are.
There are other questions you can ask about AHIMA or AAPC though that don't have to do with credentials. Just saying.
Yes, but I created the trivia games. This is what I thought would be fun, but you guys can.
I'm flashing my lights because I'm the winner.
The winner. So yeah, I just wanted to do something fun.
It was good. It was fun.
Stacy, we're ready for Stacy's show and tell. Now that we've had a light show.
Can we do Golden Girls trivia in one of our episodes? Because I'll kick ass at that.
Oh, there we go.
So, shoe and tell. So last episode, I said that I had bought a couple of pairs at Dillard's, 65% off. So this is the other pair that I bought. And these are cool because look at the heel, like on this shoe. It's like not like a normal like heel. It's kind of like this triangular heel, which I have to say, they're super cool. But walking with this big chunky heel is kind of interesting because you know how like when the shoes don't, you don't have a buckle around them and they kind of flop off your feet. You've got a little bit of this clunk on the the big heel, but they look super cute and I enjoyed wearing them. But yeah, I felt like I was going to trip in them or they might fall off my feet with the heel.
It looks like the heel part is like 5 pounds just itself. Like
it's like hollow, so it's not anything like that. But yeah, it's different. You wouldn't think it would be difficult. You think it would be easier to walk on these because they're so thick, but no, because of the shape, it feels so weird. I can't even explain the sensation that I felt in trying to walk in those when I had them on about a week and a half ago.
Oh, Stacy. There we have it. Stacy's shoe and tell.
I have more new pairs. I am buying pairs faster than I'm showing them off in the episodes. I will never run out ever.
You should probably buy stock in like Macy's or something. or Steve Madden. Yeah, totally. All right, so we have gotten really silly. This was a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it. I hope you all have enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in to our Coding Consultant Confessions podcast series. Don't forget to drop us a 5-star rating and review on Apple or wherever you listen to your favorite, or wherever you listen to your podcast. We can't wait to see you for our next confession.
Thank you for tuning in to Coding Consultant Confessions with Tony Elholmes, Stacy Buck, and Victoria Mole. Unfiltered, unedited, unapologetic. Connect with the Coding Consultant Confessions podcast on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Simply search for Coding Consultant Confessions on any of these platforms to connect and engage with Tony, Stacy, and Victoria.